Welcome to a snowy Ash Wednesday afternoon. This is the lesson on the Outcasts of Poker Flat by Bret Hart. Certainly going to provide you here with an opportunity to connect your notes to the information I would cover in class so that we're all nice and clear moving forward. So make sure that you have your notes out. Make sure that you're ready to take specific, detailed notes on the content so that you can use it specifically in your. So, what a nice opportunity here on a Ash Wednesday afternoon. It's roughly 5:57, so it's barely afternoon. This is the lesson on the Outcasts of Poker Flat. This fills in the gap that we missed because of a snow day, and that you can use this detail to certainly help you forward with preparing for the Monday essay. So as we look at why this transition and why the Outcasts of Poker Flat is so significant, is it gives us an opportunity to look at regional literature. All that means is that authors write based on where they are and what they know. So we call this local color. So Bret Hart, Harte, is a local colorist. So he's among American writers associated with this genre. We could also apply it to Mark Twain, to Kate Chopin, because they all write specific to their region. So besides presenting narratives in a specific dialect, writing the way that people actually speak, local color writers attempted to portray life in the various sections of a growing America. Hart, for example, focused many of his stories on the gold mining camps and towns. Now, this is significant because the characters featured in these particular places were different from the Emersons and Thoreaus and the more refined characters that we see developed throughout a lot of the literature of last semester and even this semester. So I think that's going to be significant, this focusing on the gold mining towns and what that means overall. I think it's important to note that even though he focuses on that particular region, lost my train of thought for 1 second. I'm coming back. However, rather than writing soberly realistic stories, local colorists like Bret Hart tended to write stories infused with eccentrics as characters. Now, eccentric is ECCENTRICS. An eccentric, I gave you the plural. An eccentric is a character with a specific trait, something that is dominant in the development of why they're significant to a story. We also talk about whimsical plotting, a whim, W-H-I-M, and then you can finish the rest of that term. Whimsical plotting is almost an unrealistic fairy tale setting. So we put characters in environments where we wouldn't normally see them, so we can see what happens to them when they're in crisis. That certainly is something that's going to apply to the Outcasts of Poker Flat. So I think that's significant. I pulled some of this research from something written by William Flint Thrall and Addison Hibbard. Now, that may not mean a whole lot to you, but it is sort of referencing where my sourcing is coming from. So they wrote a text called A Handbook to Literature, and this comes off of page 266. Not totally relevant to you, but an interesting idea nonetheless. Thrall and Hibbert also note that local colorists emphasized verisimilitude of detail without being concerned enough about truth to the larger aspects of life or human nature. So again, just in case you missed it, They emphasized truth or verisimilitude. We've seen that word before. Of detail without being concerned often enough about truth to the larger aspects of life or human nature. Now, I'm not going to explain that to you here, but I think still that's a significant idea that you might be able to flesh out in your notes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transfer over to some slides on theme. I'm going to put character at the end, but I'm going to transfer over to some slides on theme so that we can keep it all in perspective. The theme of hypocrisy is significant. So along with this sort of hidden virtue, along with, I'm looking at my notes here, along with some of the other characteristics I gave you, or the themes that you have in this presentation, I think we look at the fact that this idea of hypocrisy, how we're taking members of society that are exiled because they don't represent the values of the community. And even though they're exiled, they turn out to be far more moral than the characters of Poker Flat. So that right out is the irony. So we know that the citizens of Poker Flat's secret committee, the group that decided that Oakhurst and his friends had to go, they appear upright and just, at least to themselves. Again, that we put forth the idea that we're better than other people. However, in regards to John Oakhurst, they see him very much as a threat. He's too successful. So that's certainly part of it. Because they're threatened by him, they themselves are hypocrites for exiling him to a certain death outside of the community in the wilderness. So the hostility of the universe becomes an acceptable end for people that I was going to say pining, but for people that Poker Flats doesn't like. So if people reflect too seriously the values that we hold important and realize they don't meet them, they feel the need to expurgate, to kick them out. So certainly think. Now, after all of these people of Poker Flat sat down with John Oakhurst and lost. I think that heightens the idea of their hypocrisy. They felt slighted. They felt threatened. I might even use the word jilted to define why Oakhurst appeared to be such a threat. So once they lost all their money, they run him out of town. He's not good enough anymore. So I certainly think that's important. One citizen, and I think this is kind of a little nuanced point here, John Wheeler, decides or suggests that they hang Oakhurst as an example for the morals of everybody in the group. So we take an incredibly immoral town like Poker Flat, and we're going to use the hanging of a moral, successful character as a way to make themselves feel better. So that causes me some reflection when I think about how the story develops the characters. One more significant idea here that I think is important for us to write down is the indifference of nature. As we look at what American realism does, it pays particular attention to a growing hostility of the environment. That however precious, however magnanimous, however stuck up, if you will, man believes himself to be. A certain invincibility that man has against nature, it doesn't work. Nature shows no mercy. Nature shows no mercy to the outcasts, shows no mercy to characters in To Build a Fire, The Open Boat. This becomes a recurring theme as we move further into American realism. After Poker Flat rejects these characters, they're isolated by heavy snow. So nature separates these outcasts from any kind of safety or any kind really uh, of salvation from the fate that they have. So again, I think that's crazy. The sky clears, offers them some hope, but they only freeze to death. Or in the case of John Oakhurst, leaves the group and ends up nailing his ace to the tree to make a statement. So I think again that's incredibly important. Little side note here on the ace. The ace of clubs is considered the lowest card in poker. It's also symbolic of there's no more hope. It's a loser's hand. Oakhurst has a loser's hand. So even though he emerges as this really significant character, there's no hope for him. There's no redemption. There's nothing moving him beyond uh, anything other than what he has as an outcast from a society that decided that he was going to be some sort of major threat. I'm going to end this video presentation here. I've given you themes. You have the wonderful ability as you read to write some character notes on Oakhurst, on the Duchess and Mother Shipton. You reflect on Uncle Billy, Tom Simpson, and Piney. Of course, you could talk about Jim Wheeler and Jake Woods, but those two, Wheeler and Woods, are so insignificant to the actual theme of the story that I wouldn't focus on them. But I would be able to write a character analysis of Oakhurst, etc., etc. So make sure you have that stuff moving forward. So this will bring us to the end of this particular section. What I'm going to do is right after I finish this, I'm going to insert a PowerPoint slide that has some significant study questions that I think you should go through and be able to answer in your notes and in your material so that you can be prepared for the next day on this lesson. Also, expect that I'm going to put this in the PlayPosit so that I can track that you actually get it done. Now, this is in response to the fact that I wasn't there because of the snow day, just like you weren't, to teach this. And this is the material that you will use to compare or contrast this to Frederick Douglass. So it's important to talk about the themes in the Outcasts of Poker Flat. So I'm going to outline 5 themes so that you have an opportunity to apply these to the Outcasts of Poker Flat, but then to also apply them to Mark Twain, Kate Chopin, ultimately down the road. So make sure that you hold on to these as major concepts. So when we talk about the first theme, which we're going to call it judgment, we're going to call it judgment of other people. We're going to call it, you can call it condescension, you can call it any number of different things. But this is ultimately the idea that those who believe they are moral, those who believe that they are more in charge than somebody else, they feel it necessary to judge those who distract from what their vision of the way things should be. Now, I phrased it this way because this is exactly what occurs in the Outcasts of Poker Flat. A corrupt, gambling, on the fringe town decides that it's going to grow a conscience. And when it grows a conscience, it decides that it needs to purge those who will detract from their reputation or from the general health, at least how they perceive it, of the entire community. And I think this especially applies to John Oakhurst, who is more successful than anybody else at Poker Flat. I think this applies to Mother Shipton, to the Duchess, not probably so much to Piney and Tom, but they sort of get caught up as the collateral damage. So when we talk about judgment, The townspeople living in Poker Flats cast judgment on the main characters and exile them from the town. Certainly, we have that. Second time I said it so that we have it nice and clearly in the idea. The story describes these exiles as working in unfavorable professions. Again, Oakhurst is the gambler. We've got some prostitutes. We have the town drunk and Uncle Billy. So we're going to make an example of these particular characters. So I think that's incredibly important. The whole issue, however, is complicated because the characters that are exiled from Poker Flats possess certain moral qualities, certain values that separate them in a good way from the rest of the town. For example, when you take a look at the kindness and sacrifice of characters like the Duchess and Mother Shipton, I think that certainly is going to provide us with context to look at the moral ideas. So these redeemable characteristics, by describing the characters as capable of kindness and sacrifice, second time I've said it, Hart demonstrates that these are values that are important moving forward. So I think really that's the first sort of general context of what we need to talk about here. A second major theme is that of innocence and purity. The Duchess, Mother Shipton, even though they are corrupt characters in Poker Flats, they demonstrate certain purity in the way that they behave. Also, if you look at Tom, he's called the innocent in the story because he's separated from a lot of these particular flaws that other characters have. So Tom and Piney represent traditional notions of purity. Traditional notions of purity. However, and you could even say ironically, Piney's relationship with the Duchess challenges the condemnation of the Duchess. So their relationship, the Duchess, who is a quote-unquote fallen woman, who doesn't really, not even doesn't really, but doesn't uphold the values that Poker Flat now believes in, we juxtapose, or we put these two characters together so we can get a good look at the fallen with the moral representation in the story. So innocence and purity is used to assuage or sort of to ameliorate, two big words there, the character flaws in the Duchess and ultimately Mother Shipton. So their close friendship intertwines the innocent and the corrupt idea in the story. It really illustrates that everybody is the same in the grand scheme of things.